with Honorable Wilfred Sedi Elrington. Of course, he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we're very grateful that you joined us on this Monday morning. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. Morning, Belize.
Now, Minister, this is a very important time to be having this conversation. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we know this is the final week before our neighbor, Guatemala, goes to referendum for the I.C.J. This has been a long process in talking about getting to the referendum. And I want to find out from your end what is taking place in terms of monitoring what's happening on the ground there and sharing with us that perspective.
Okay. As you know, we have our best ambassador posted in Guatemala. That's Alexis Rosado. He's not only our best ambassador, but he's perhaps the person who has the most knowledge of this issue, this claim, in the diplomatic corps. He has been dealing with it for years and years and years. I was very closely supportive of Assad when he was involved, and when I came in, he was right there with me. So he is on the ground. He's very knowledgeable about diplomacy. He understands the importance of getting a good sense of what is happening and of keeping us posted on what is happening. So he has been doing that very faithfully.
Now, in having been to Guatemala to cover issues relating this before, I know that oftentimes we're in Belize, this issue is at the forefront of our minds. It's not always the case in Guatemala. Given the proximity of the referendum, is there now a sense of public awareness and opinion on the issue?
My sense is that it is still not a matter that is in the popular imagination of the Guatemalan masses. It's really something, it seems to me, that is more in the mind of the business people, the government officials, the academics, and the like, but not necessarily the masses of the people.
Is it that perhaps the massive size of Guatemala as a country, and of course its population, that despite a national effort to create awareness of the referendum and of the possibility, the idea of taking the territorial dispute for a resolution before the I.C.J., that despite the numbers, the size of the population is a very daunting and difficult task to get everybody on board? Is it the impression that you get?
That is certainly one aspect of it, but it is never my sense that the Guatemalan masses were as attuned to this issue as the Belizean populace. I think the Belizean population has always viewed this claim very, very closely. It is perhaps one of the closest things to their hearts. That is not the case in Guatemala. In Guatemala, historically, it has really, it seems to me, been an issue that concerned the political class, the diplomatic class, the business class, and not necessarily the masses, who have many, many more problems, more pressing problems to deal with than this way.
Yeah. Now, obviously the most pertinent issue at this time in terms of being able to understand the implications is the constitutional challenge that has been put forward in Guatemala. And this challenge is going all the way back to 2009 with the signing of the compromise. How do you view this impacting the referendum and the potential road ahead to the I.C.J.?
The information we are getting is that it really, there is no indication that it is going to get any real traction. That's the information we are getting, you know. At this point in time, I don't think the court has given an indication of if it will hear it or when it will hear it. So the referendum is next week, Sunday. A tremendous amount of money has been spent in it, and I personally don't think that it's going to be derailed at this moment by
Let me ask you a question.
Claims, but I really don't know. I mean, I'm just telling you.
But from a legal perspective, using your experience, even if it is heard before the courts, that would not necessarily stop the referendum from taking? Maybe an injunction is
That's the
forced.
indication I'm getting. The indication I'm getting is that it's not likely to derail the process. That's the impression I'm getting.
What efforts have been taking place on our side? I know that it's a question that we've always asked you in terms of the awareness campaign stateside, so to speak. I know that former Ambassador Stuart Leslie was also important in this particular exercise. With his departure, what efforts are continued to be made to raise the awareness on our end, seeing as though what will take place in Guatemala on Sunday will undoubtedly have a bearing on how we vote come our referendum time?
Even when Stuart was there, you know, really Alexis was a person who was in overall responsibility. Ambassador Leslie was very good, but he was only one cog in the wheel. Other people who are involved, and they continue to be involved. We continue to do the education exercises. As a matter of fact, I'm scheduled to go and speak to one of the secondary schools down south very shortly. And Alexis continues to be active and engaged, and we have other people. So we are continuing with the education campaign. We're continuing assiduously with it. We were supposed to have gotten a budgetary figure at this last budget exercise, but it was thought more prudent to do a supplementary budget for it. So that is being worked on. That's being discussed as we speak.
And the current estimated cost for the education campaign?
By $8 million. A hefty little sum. So we have got to make sure that we plan carefully in accessing it, obtaining it, and the like.
You've spoken in other media interviews that you've looked into finding outside donors to assist in defraying the costs.
The UN agencies are helping us, the European unions are helping us, and we are looking to other countries as well. Turkey, Canada, a group of friends. So we are also trying our best, along with the Guatemalans actually, and in concert with them, to get the resources needed for this process.
Has there been an unofficial poll or survey just to get the pulse of the people in terms of this conversation?
In Belize?
Yes.
Not my knowledge, not to my knowledge. We have
so you don't have an idea at this point whether people are for or against?
No, my only assessment has come from the groups I have talked with, and I can't think of a single group that I have talked to which has not indicated that they think this is the best plan, best solution once they have heard the arguments. Sometimes when you start out, they're a little hostile, but as soon as you lay out the picture clearly to them, they agree that this is really our best option.
No, I would hate to bring politics into it. It's more of a national concern than it is a partisan or a political one. However, there have been organizations, I can think of the Belize Progressive Party, for instance, whose mantra has always been no to the I.C.J. And without a doubt, that party has its followers. How do you, in terms of the national campaign towards education on this matter, how do you sort of bring the message to people who may staunchly feel that the I.C.J. shouldn't be an option in this particular case?
Some people you will never convince, and so you will be respectful towards those people, but I think you need to make sure that you focus your attention on the mass as a whole, the population as a whole. You know, Isani, never in the history of our country has there been any matter of great national importance that has been without controversy. 1798, when the Mabin had to make the decision as to whether or not they would fight, there was great opposition to standing and fighting. There were those who wanted to run away. And it is said that it was the people from Flowers Bank, the 14 from Flowers Bank, who came and made the decisive decision. Also, too, I can recall that at the time of the election, independence, 1981, the opposition, now government, but was on record as saying that they would like to have it deferred, delayed, because they thought that it was too risky for us to go on our own at that point in time. They wanted us to gather some strength and the like. That has always been the case. Whatever issue you can think of, there will be those who are going to oppose it. that is part of life. I think it's healthy because it forces the rest of us to think our position through and to make sure that what we are doing is in fact the best interest of the nation.
Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, because one of the criticisms of this process has been the lack of visibility in the education campaign. There has been money invested so far in being able to start this process, but if you were to poll the public beyond appearances, which you willingly give to the media, there's been very little information disseminated to the general public. And we have heard previously before that you visit schools and speak with schools, but ultimately they don't make up the voting population that will participate in this referendum. How do you answer to that particular criticism?
Okay, certainly more can be done. We have used social media, we use one-to-one, we have dealt with the group situation, but the bottom line for everything we do is finance. And we can only act to the extent that the finances which we have and the other resources, human resources, will allow us. There are limitations on those resources. And it was thought that it may not have been prudent earlier on to expend too much money and to get into too much of a full-blown campaign too early before the referendum takes place. The intention is to start off slowly, kind of low-intensity campaign, and then to build up the closer we come to the referendum. So that is the game plan, and that is what we have been advised.
Is it safe
the
to say
challenge,
then,
though, that you face in that situation, I would say, is that when there's a lack of information, when there's a void, people make their own assumptions.
Yeah.
And we've seen quite a bit of uprising about issues with Guatemala and going to the I.C.J, spearheaded by some of the very people that Isani mentioned. We've seen the issues with the Belize territorial volunteers and the issues in the Chiquibo. So where the case has not been laid forward to the public and we see these issues taking place, for many Belizeans, they have already made up their minds.
Actually, you know, those very incidences have caused people to say, look, let us try to solve it peacefully, because we don't want incidences of these types continuing. And the only way we can, in fact, get some kind of assurance that they will cease is if we have the dispute resolved. So it has not had a negative effect. As a matter of fact, I like the maxim that there is nothing seemingly negative that does not have its positive aspects to it. And every time there is one of these incidents, every time people go on the SAS, and every time people call in and talk about it, there are others who are listening. And if there's one thing I can say about the Belizean people in large measure are very, very intelligent. They do not react in a knee-jerk fashion. They think carefully about what they do, and then they act. There will always be those who will act in a knee-jerk fashion, but the majority of the Belizean people, as a matter of fact, the safety and security of our country to this point in time has largely been due to the majority and good sense of the Belizean people who, when we were really under pressure, came forward in flying colors by making the right decision. And that was so in 1798, that was so in 1981, and I'm sure that is going to be the case when we go to the referendum.
so is it safe to say then that following Sunday's outcome in Guatemala, that our efforts on this side will intensify in terms of, I've been made to understand, and this is where I'm going with this particular question, that whatever the outcome is in Guatemala, then we will shape our campaign in a sense to kind of either buttress our position going forward. Is it to say then that going forward, as of Sunday, our campaign on this side will be intensified to strengthen our position of going to the I.C.J?
I can say with certainty that once there is a yes vote in Guatemala, immediately thereafter, our activities are going to be intensified. If there is a no vote, I can't speak to that. That is really a decision for the cabinet. remember now, whatever we do in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has the blessings of the cabinet. And I must say this, I think I wanted to say this for some time, but I want the public of Belize to know that certainly I have been exceedingly fortunate in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in that most, if not all, of what I have done has had the full backing of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. And I know that there were times when there were those who were in fact urging him to cause me to be removed from the position. I mean, there are umpteen times when the call has been made, and I'm sure people close to him have in fact urged him to move me. But he has stayed the course, and he and the cabinet have been very, very supportive of me. Whatever happens post-Sunday is going to be determined by the cabinet.
Let's play out those scenarios. What will be the potential action if come Sunday? Well, let me step back before that. What validates the vote in Guatemala? And then we can move into what happens if they vote no.
So long as they vote yes, that is the voice of the people. No matter what turnout, that is the decision of the country of Guatemala.
So legally, it doesn't matter how much of their voting population turns out, the majority of 5 will be able to make this decision.
You are correct on that.
Yes.
So long as the majority.
Now, what happens if the Guatemalans vote no?
If the Guatemalans vote no, we are in exactly the position we are now today, where everything is up in the air. We don't know what is going to happen in terms of the future resolution of the dispute. The matter is up and open in the air. So that is the consequence of that.
And that remains a very real possibility, correct?
Yeah, that's always a possibility.
Is there any indication, because obviously this is a relationship that is established as foreign ministers to discuss this issue, as to whether or not there's a no vote taking place, that there would be a subsequent referendum?
That is the thinking, that sometime later on, when conditions change, it may be appropriate for us to do another referendum. But of course, all these things have legal implications. But that certainly was the thinking of other earlier foreign ministers with whom we discussed. Certainly on the Guatemalan side, the people in office that I have met in office have been very firm on the idea that the I.C.J. should be the means of resolving this matter. And if I may just interject at this point in time, I think Belizeans will be very happy to know that the Secretary General of the United Nations recently recommended that the Guyana-Venezuela dispute be resolved at the I.C.J. That is a position that the government and people of Guyana have always sought to have happen, and they are very elated by that decision. We, of course, are happy for them that, in fact, it is going to be resolved at the I.C.J. as well.
So, if Guatemalans vote yes on Sunday, then that proceeds into our campaign period for our referendum.
That is going to put a stimulus behind our campaign.
Now, what is the timeline that we're looking at?
Okay, good question. Because we have to do the re-registration, and that doesn't commence until July, August, September. Remember now, we have to do the re-registration and then the elections. There's no certainty, it seems to me, as to the redistricting, but certainly the re-registration is a must. The thinking at this point in time is that there may not be that kind of rush to re-register as one would like. That would be ideal. Belizeans may just not be too bothered about going and getting re-registered. I think that has been the historical pattern. So that is the thinking at this point in time. But whatever the situation is, it is not my thinking that we can get away with an election before the last quarter of
referendum or election.
Well, we'll have the referendum before the last quarter of this year or early next year.
Let's look at this matter from a layman's perspective, because I understand the complexities of what we're discussing here, but the average person out there may not necessarily be attuned to everything that's happening at the political level, so to speak. Going to the I.C.J, and there's a potential that we may very well lose the case in a manner of speaking. What direct implications do you foresee would take place on the ground? Does Guatemala then...
If you're going to go to the I.C.J, I mean?
Yes.
Whatever decision, it is my view, that whatever decision is made at the I.C.J would be better than a decision made in any other way. And what are the options? If you don't get a decision made by the I.C.J, and if you can't get a decision made by sitting down and discussing it, as we have tried to do over the past almost century, what is the other option? None of us want to go there. So it is my thinking that irrespective of the decision that is taken at the I.C.J, it would be better than the other option, which we have not yet in fact experienced.
There's a school of thought, however, that going to the I.C.J means that we're prepared to give up something should we lose. No. As opposed to not going at all and keep Belize 8867 intact.
That's why we need the media. Because my understanding is that the I.C.J is going to tell us what our rights are. We may not agree with it. For example, we have a decision from the C.C.J which speaks to us having to pay $90 million to Mr. and the Ashcroft Alliance. That is a decision that a lot of us don't agree with. We don't agree with it, but that's the decision of the court. That is what the court says is just. So there are those of us who believe that it is fine and good, and there are those of us who don't believe that it's fine and good. But that's the decision of the court, and that's how democratic, civilized countries conduct their business.
It's interesting that you would say that, though, because I've also been hearing, and perhaps this may be anecdotal at best, but it's hearsay, that should the I.C.J rule in Belize's favor, that Guatemala can simply tell its people, well, we won't recognize the decision of the I.C.J.
Actually, in the 2008 agreement which we made, it was clearly stipulated that once a ruling is made by the I.C.J, both the I.C.J and Guatemala and Belize will work together to implement whatever decision is given at the I.C.J. So there is not provision for only the I.C.J to make its ruling and be finished with the process. No. The intention is that everything is going to be done after a ruling is made to make sure that the borders are finally defined and demarcated.
This gives us a great opportunity to talk about what is happening at the border. And my question to you is, let's look forward and say Belizeans voted yes to going to the I.C.J. The I.C.J rules in our favor. As you pointed out, based on the agreement, the special agreement made, the compromise, Guatemala should recognize it. Now we know oftentimes governments make decisions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people on the ground will follow through. What changes at our borders? What will be the impact of affirmation by the I.C.J of our territorial boundaries in terms of how we confront issues in the Sarstoon, how we confront issues in the Chiquipo?
All right, I think if you look dispassionately at the history of this claim from 1859 up to this point in time, we have seen Guatemala behaving very respectfully and properly for at least 98% of the time. Remember, it's from 1859, but they have respected our western border, although they call it a adjacency line. They have respected it. When they come through our customs and our immigration, the children come in. So they have always respected it. And even in the maritime areas, although we have not had internationally recognized delimitations, they have in de facto appreciated that this area is Belizean space and have not come into it. So the history has been very good. The history has in fact been very encouraging in that, in my view, the Guatemalan government has acted very responsibly in observing the de facto limits of Belize's territory.
But here's the argument. While at the governmental level, that acknowledgement or recognition may be so, on the ground, you still have incursions in the Chiquibul. You still have Guatemalan, excuse me, sorry, you still have Guatemalan fisher folk coming into Belizean waters on a daily basis. Well, so it begs the question, is it being recognized?
Well, Isani, the United States government, the mighty United States, Mr. Trump, Prime President Trump, is now sending troops,
National Guard,
National Guard to the southern border because Latin Americans are coming in. The people in Europe are in a tizzy because immigrants, migrants from Africa going across the Mediterranean and going. So I'm told that the Great Wall of China was built to keep out the Mongols. So historically, there have always been cases of migration taking place and countries trying to keep others out. That has always been the case. So that even after we have resolved the dispute with Guatemala, we will still be faced with that issue. But the good thing is that once we have it resolved, we will then know clearly and have the world acknowledge where our boundaries are. We will be able to clear it out and properly mark it so that the world can see it. And if and when there are any disputes and problems and we have to go to the international community for assistance, they can see, yes, this is Belize's defined territory. And yes, these people are infringing this territory, and therefore we need to assist Belize in its effort to regularize the situation.
Okay. All right, well, what we're going to do at this time is go ahead and take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Honorable Wilfred Elrington talking about Belize-Guatemala relations. So stay tuned.
We know that in today's busy business environment, you need banking to be fast, flexible, and convenient. With Belize Bank's free online banking, you can process employee payroll, make Social Security contributions, make GST payments, process customs duty payments, view account information, pay bills, and more. Sign up for Belize Bank online today and spend more time focusing on what matters most, the success of your business. Belize Bank Online. Easy, convenient, secure.
Share the love with Smart's SMS sharing. To share from your bundle, all you have to do is send a message to 767 and in the body, put the number of the person followed by a space and the number of SMS you wish to share. It's that easy. Share the love with Smart's SMS sharing, because Smart the love.
When they see you, they see who they want to be. So what will they see if they don't see you? Belize needs big men, and big men teach.
Apply today. For more information, including scholarship opportunities, visit teachbelize.org.
Welcome back, and if you're just tuning in, it's 7:31 and we are continuing a conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Wilfred Sedi Elrington, On April 15th, Guatemala goes to the referendum to make their decision on the I.C.J. So we're taking the opportunity to put the Belize-Guatemala issue into perspective once again. Minister Ellington, before we went to the break, you were speaking of the fact that incursions will continue with or without a ruling from the I.C.J. I posed the question during the break, and perhaps we should say it out here as well, in terms of whether or not a position or a stance or a firmer position can then be established if we have the agreement of the I.C.J. that our territory is as we know it now.
All right. When we now approach friends of our country for assistance in the Belize-Guatemala issue, one of the first things they say to me is that, one, Mr. Elrington, we are friends with Guatemala as well as friends with Belize. Two, your borders, the borders of Guatemala and Belize, have not been internationally accepted. And therefore, we don't think it is prudent for us to get involved one way or the other. So you're quite right. Once the I.C.J. makes a ruling and clearly articulates what the position is, then it gives us a greater strength and certainly more confidence to be able to go to our allies and friends and say, look, this is the position. This is the boundary as agreed to by the I.C.J. And these people are violating it, and therefore we're asking you to assist. They will not be in a position to say to us, well, we don't know what your boundaries are. They can say, both of you are our friends, and to that extent we'll try to mediate. We don't want to interfere in internal affairs because that's the first thing they tell you. But certainly we will want to ensure that the international law is maintained and that the boundaries are observed.
Now, I want to take the opportunity to be able to talk about why you and this government and those who are pushing for a yes vote to the I.C.J. are so confident that it is the best decision for this country. And I know a lot of that has to do with the legal opinions that have been put forward and all the previous attempts that have been made in terms of being able to resolve this issue. So let's move into that.
Let me just say first and foremost that from my point of view, I have always been acutely aware of this difference in size between our two countries and the difference in power and also the historical events that have taken place in Guatemala. Guatemala has had a very stormy history where it has in fact had to act very forcefully. The authorities thought they had to act very forcefully against their own indigenous people. And that episode in the history of Guatemala is not a pleasant one. But I've also noticed, going further afield, the intense and really incredible sufferings and hardships that people have experienced who are involved in border disputes. The Palestinians, the Israelis, you know, it has always, that is a horrific situation. And much the same happens in other countries where you have, like in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where you have people fighting over territory. So that Belize is so small and so vulnerable, we cannot afford to be involved in any kind of military confrontation. Our population is so small. Guatemala has 17 million. We are not 500,000. So, to my mind, my common sense dictates to me that a peaceful resolution is the best way to go. And because I'm trained as an attorney, I am always attracted to have these matters resolved at the court. But I also have a quote, and I see I'm going, the third issue now is a legal opinion.
Yeah.
I have a legal opinion from one of the best lawyers who have spoken on the matter, a fellow named William Bianchi, Belize. A very, very interesting book, a short, small book. I think we have access to it at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and people can get it. But I'd just like to read the last paragraph of his conclusion.
Sure.
It says, prescinding, however, from considerations such as these, and he's talking about, because he talks about the possibility that one day the Belizean people might just decide that they don't want to have anything to do with resolving this matter and leave it just as it is. He contemplated all of that, you know what I mean? But he says that notwithstanding all of those considerations, as well as from contemplation on future events centered about the employment of the unorthodox and extra-legal methods of Cristiano Medina and A. Escalona Ramos. They are talking about different ways to get Belize. It says, forgetting all of that, the fact of the matter is that at the present time, Guatemala has a legally desperate case. So there is not a single legal opinion that has suggested that Guatemala has a strong case. Everyone has said that the case is legally desperate, is really very poor, don't have a chance of winning at the I.C.J. So even opinion given to them by people whom they have in fact retained to give them an advice. So from a common sense point of view, you have a giant and you're such a small country. I've heard people tell me that they believe in the story of David and Goliath. And these are people who are very eminent citizens, citizens, you know. And I know that in those days, people were very, very religious. People really believed, and so the followers of David believed that God was on their side. But what we have seen over the years, and the horror that has taken place in places like, again, the Middle East, Palestine, and Israel. And these are Israelis supposed to be God's chosen people. But it is incredible the kind of brutality that goes on there, the kind of carnage, the kind of destruction. And it's incredible to even believe that God would be part of that kind of activity. So the reality has been that the bigger and the more powerful has always prevailed in our lifetime over the smaller and the weaker.
You've spoken of meeting with particular groups, and I don't know if you can share with us which groups those are, but you said that you've entered into presentations or in interactions with these groups and they had a dissenting opinion, and you were able to sway them into understanding that this is the best way forward. What have you found to be the most convincing argument as to why we should go to the I.C.J., especially when you are encountering a group that is already opposed?
The reality of what can happen. You are a small country. We don't have any defense capability. The Guatemalans are aggressive. They are much more powerful than us. All the legal opinion has said that we have a strong, good case to go to the I.C.J. The international community is fully supportive of that initiative. At the present point in time, we are dependent to a very large extent on our security and the peace and tranquility that prevails between us. We are dependent upon the initiative of the OAS and the EU, but they have been making it very clear that they are not going to be there in perpetuity because their citizens are not going to be paying for us. So that we face a very real prospect that if we don't get it resolved in this peaceful way, the matter is not going to get better, it's going to get worse, and we are going to be bereft of friends and people of goodwill because they can't stay with us any longer. So it's a situation where the longer the matter is protracted, the more isolated we are going to become, and the more dangerous our situation is going to be.
I don't want to jump the gun here, but I'm looking at the succession in terms of the chain of events to come. When we look at the legal aspect of this matter, we haven't heard anything of a legal team that will be representing Belize once we get to the point where we've all agreed that we're going to the I.C.J. We're looking at a situation where at present we're still trying to come up with monies to defray certain expenses, for instance, the referendum. What are we looking at in terms of our actual representation come the day of presenting this matter?
We already have lawyers retained. There's a firm of lawyers called Freshfields, and we have always had the best lawyers available in the world, retaining us. Lauterpacht, who recently died, Sir Eli Lauterpacht, he was one of our attorneys, and he has a whole team made up of English, French, and I think we have one from South America. Young lawyer Ben Jarasovich, who represented us very recently at the I.C.J. He is also part of the team. So we do have a team. We've put together a team. And this is really a continuation of the representation which had been engaged by the previous government. We have not made any fundamental change. We are using the same people over the years. But we do have a very, very good team. I met with some of them. I met with at least 2 of them in London when I went there a year or 2 ago.
Will this form the basis?
Has met with them. And so we have a very clear idea as to what our legal team is going to look like and how it's going to be configured. I'm sure that there will be those from Belize, lawyers from here who are going to be working with them in some way or the other. Also, we're going to have research assistants, people doing research for them. A lot of the work has to be done because we have to do a lot of research work. And so we have people like Dr. Bird and other people will be involved, Murphy, but local lawyers too.
Will this aid in the education campaign? Because as Marlene mentioned earlier, it's not as though we're hearing a lot about what's taking place and what the implications are, etc. Now that we've established that there is indeed a legal team that has been put together, will this information also be shared with the public in terms of the
everything is going to be made public because it's the public who pays for all these things. Everything the taxpayers pays for, you know. And we are the employees of the taxpayers. So there is nothing secret. I can tell you that this same attorney, Ben, has his long last name. He recently came here and he actually met with some public officers. And one public officer told me after he heard from the guy, he became convinced. Before that, he was on the line, on the fence. But once he heard the clarity, he was very convinced. He was sold on the idea. You will notice that we have had sessions at the Bliss Institute. We brought in people from Guyana. We brought in people from St. Lucia. People came all the way from Australia. So we are continuously bringing in people to educate the public. And we also have local meetings and seminars and the like.
Yeah. Minister Ellington, do we have a contingency plan in the event that Belize votes no?
I don't see what kind of contingency plan we can have. If you vote no, you go back to the status quo. This is the situation now. And what is our present position? Let me tell you internationally as how we are perceived. We have no defense guarantee from any country in the world to defend us. We are such a small market that no big country is going to jeopardize their interests in being able to deal with other countries by looking out for us. In other words, if a decision to my mind has got to be made as to whether the British business people want to favor Belize over Guatemala in terms of doing business, their sense would be to do business with Guatemala as opposed to Belize. If you look at the situation between the United States and China and Taiwan, for many, many years, the United States used to protect Taiwan, still has an agreement with Taiwan, but they ceased to have diplomatic relations with Taiwan after the 70s when Nixon went to China, and now they are very close to China because of the size of the market. Governments have a responsibility to their citizens, and their responsibility is to make sure that the welfare of those citizens are taken care of. They want to have the best standard of living for their citizens, the greatest degree of security for their citizens. And when they are able to deal directly with these big countries, they are directly enhancing the conditions of life of their citizens.
This is not an...
So those are Those are the realities of the situation. We're a tiny, tiny country.
This is other
benefits, though, that we get. I mean, you have a massive fire in Guatemala and a fire come across the Belize. You need assistance. The water that we deal with every day, the river from the water that flows into Cayo and down, come through Guatemala. You know, we have people who go there for education. We could have people who go there for business. We have people who go there for schooling, for health, so that there's really, you want to be able to enhance those relationships. I don't think anybody can feel comfortable with having an enemy at their back. You don't want to have an enemy at your back. The last thing you want is to have an enemy at your back. You want to have a friend talk about I have your back. You don't want an enemy to tell you that. An enemy tells you that he has your back, you can't sleep. But if a friend tells you he has your back, you can sleep comfortably because you don't have to worry.
So this is not necessarily an anti-British sentiment per se, but the fact that we were once a colony of England and then we subsequently received our independence centuries later, and the fact that we find ourselves in this predicament, one would argue this could have been dealt with by the English decades, centuries ago if that were the case. Yeah. But can it be argued that they've left us in a very tough spot? They've left us essentially in a pickle.
Actually, the British tried their best repeatedly to resolve it, but it takes two to tango. So it wasn't a matter that the British alone could have solved it. No, it had to be solved with the Guatemalans. They are the other side. So it took two to tango, and up to 2008, the Guatemalans had refused to go to the I.C.J, although that had been proposed to them by the British from the 1930s, 40s, all right? So the second thing to remember is that the decision to go to independence wasn't a decision foisted on us by the British. The British still have Gibraltar, they still have the Malvinas, the Falklands, they still have the Cayman Islands, they have still other islands that are colonies. It was the government and people of Belize who took the decision that we wanted to become independent. Having become independent, there are consequences to that. Just like when you get married, there are consequences to that. You have to now look after your own safety and security. So it doesn't help to harp on the fact that the British left us in this lurch. You have a problem in Pakistan and India right now. They continue to kill themselves almost every day, but they were once British colonies too. You have the same thing in Africa. You have the same thing all over the world. Once we are an independent, sovereign nation, the responsibility rests with us to make sure that we keep our society safe and secure. That's our responsibility. There's no point harping on the British or the Americans or anybody else.
I don't mean to be cynical or argumentative in the way I look at things. However, one can say, look, granted, we wanted to become an independent and sovereign nation apart from England as the crown. But from independence in 1981 to where we are present, people could argue that we still haven't reached the political maturity that we ought to, where we ought to be, at least in terms of dealing with an issue such as this. If we're still bickering about certain things internally and it's sort of difficult to get our act together, then how do we on our own take on an issue of this magnitude?
No, you see, you are using the same argument that the opposition used in 1981 when they thought that we were not sufficiently mature to take on independence. History has proven them wrong. History has proven quite clearly that we are quite capable of looking after our own affairs. And we are quite capable of coming to the proper decision. I entertain no doubt whatsoever, that once we do a proper education campaign, the Belizean people are going to say, yes, this is the correct thing to do. Because the consequences, the evidence is very clear. You have a country that is getting bigger, more powerful, more populous. We are small, we are weak, we are The population is not growing as fast as we should. Our resources are very, very limited. We are still living to a very large extent on the begging bowl. So we are not in any position to defend this country in terms of military might, even in terms of the diplomatic resources that we have. And really and truly, we have a pretty small diplomatic force, but it is a very effective force and it has kept us well all these years, but we can't rely on that. Most other countries, including the United States, have military defense guarantee. That's why you have things like NATO. The United States guarantees South Korea's security. They provide guarantee to Japan. They provide guarantee to Taiwan. They don't provide any guarantee to Belize. The United Kingdom, they have a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and those, the United States and the United Kingdom are allies. They know that in the event of any kind of problem, they are going to go to the other's rescue. They have agreements to that end. We have no such agreement. We have no agreement with Mexico. We have no agreement with Guatemala. We have no agreement with the United States. We have no agreement with CARICOM. No, nobody to defend us or to guarantee our security and safety. We are basically on this huge ocean in a little canoe all by ourselves.
I have one final question to ask, and obviously we have very limited information about this issue, but we know last week we were made aware that there are a group of Belizeans who are looking to potentially put forward a constitutional challenge similar as to what has taken place in Guatemala. What is your information on this issue? Absolutely
none. You're telling me for the first time, but it would not surprise me. You know, people do all kinds of things, but that is a democracy. That is the beauty of a democracy. Everybody is able to go and articulate his or her own view. That, to my mind, is healthy. I have no difficulty with it. I say more power to them.
Now, I think to close, what is most important is that we allow you the opportunity to speak to the everyday person in Belize who perhaps monitors what happens based on what happens in the newscast with incursions, perhaps not privy to what is taking place in Guatemala. Speak to them as to what would be your advice in analyzing this particular situation and whether or not we should go to the I.C.J.
In analyzing, I thought I was being very clear. As far as I'm concerned, Marilena, we have tried all the medium that is used to try to resolve disputes peacefully. I wasn't on the scene, but there were other people who came before me. The British tried it. The local Belizeans tried it. Those have not worked. The British tried from the 1930s to get the Guatemalans to go to the I.C.J. They refused until 2008. Lo and behold, in 2008, they have agreed to go. So if we were still a colony of Britain, we would go to the I.C.J. The British would have taken that decision. In 1948, our local legislative assembly, 1949, voted that we should go to the I.C.J. My view, it is not my view that I am wiser than all those British advisors, that I am wiser than all our predecessors, that I am wiser than Mr. Goldstone, who advocated that we should settle this matter at the I.C.J. It's not my view at all that I am wiser than them. As a matter of fact, my view coincides with their view that we should go to the I.C.J. I am a pacifist. I don't like war. But war is a reality of life. War in India and Pakistan, the war in Palestine and Israel, the warring in Turkey and Syria and Africa, all over the place. I don't want war. I am terrified by it. I see only death, destruction, and devastation. I know in Central America we have had our history of wars. We have civil war in Guatemala, war between El Salvador and Honduras, whatever it is. Problem in Venezuela at this point in time, problem in Colombia at this point in time. I don't want that. I would like, when I die, to die knowing that Belize was never embroiled in any kind of military conflict and that our people are always safe and secure. And to that extent, I would like to see this dispute resolved peacefully. And as I'm saying, I didn't study law just for fun. I studied it because I thought that the courts of justice are perhaps the best place to solve disputes. That is not to say that I always agree with the judges, because they are human beings just like you and I. They will make mistakes. Pilate made a mistake when he condemned Jesus Christ to death. It's a mistake. The court was wrong then. So I know that courts can be wrong, but I prefer to take my chances with the court than to take my chances having hordes of Guatemalans come across the border or have Guatemalan military come aboard the border. And we can't have assistance from the international community because they say to us, well, you don't have internationally agreed borders. That's the point I take.
All right. Thank you very much for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much for inviting me, ma'am. Thanks very much.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the ride across Belize with the Social Security Board. So stay tuned.